Welcome to our webinar on organizational design for the platform revolution. We'll discuss how to staff a marketplace as part of our Marketplace Best Practices series. The topics we'll cover in today's webinar will kick off with an introduction of the 3 thought leaders that'll be deep diving into the subject. We'll then discuss marketplaces in the platform economy. I'll hand it over to Peter, who will talk about the race for platform talent. And then he'll segue over to Shaun, who's going to talk about a 180-day plan, how to build your organization for a marketplace in the platform economy. Then we'll open up the floor to Q&A. Feel free to use the Q&A sessions in Zoom to ask questions at any point during the presentation. Our 3 panelists include Peter Evans from Platform Strategy Institute, Shaun Budnik from Throughline, and myself, Tom McFadyen, CEO of McFadyen Digital. We'll each have 1 slide about ourselves and our companies, and then we'll jump into the bulk of the content that you want to hear about. First, 1 slide about McFadyen Digital, 4 facts about us. We work on large-scale enterprise, e-commerce, and marketplace solutions. We've pushed pretty much every limit of scale for commerce and marketplaces in terms of revenue, transaction flow, assets under management, SKU count, order items, multi-site users, etc. Second thing to know about us is we're very experienced at doing this. Been in business over 1/3 of a century, providing digital solutions. We've been honored to serve over 10% of the Fortune 500. Almost a 1/4 century building out e-commerce solutions, helping hundreds of clients from Fortune 500 to mid-market to unicorn startups generate tens of billions of dollars of GMV. In 15 years in marketplaces. We're the most experienced agency and system integrator focused on marketplaces. We've helped dozens of clients generate billions of dollars of gross merchandise value cumulatively. Third thing to know about us is we're a global company. So our headquarters in the US, we have nearshore in Brazil. We've been operating there for about a decade, a little under a decade. And we've been operating offshore in India for almost 2 decades in multiple cities there. And fourth thing is we're innovators and thought leaders in the space. We provide dozens of different thought leadership pieces, which are available on our website or through other requests, including the book, The Marketplace Best Practices, upon which this series is based, a 450-page bestseller on Amazon in the commerce category. We have marketplace maturity model white papers that talk about the aspects of marketplaces, marketplace enablement steps, which is how to implement a marketplace, marketplace sweet spot, which is like our quadrant, magic quadrant or wave, comparing all the different marketplace software vendors. We're also early members in the MACH Alliance, which is a modern technology for commerce and marketplace solutions. Lots of additional information, so feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about any of these topics. I'll hand it over to Peter to talk about himself and Platform Strategy Institute.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. And thank you and your team for inviting us today to talk about this really interesting and important topic. My name is Peter Evans, and I'm the managing partner of the Platform Strategy Institute, and also have formed a partnership with Adapt Lab and Shaun to launch an interesting practice that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But first, let me explain that some of the work that I've been doing at the Platform Strategy Institute has been really around this idea of leadership and talent around platforms. Also have been leading a project around experience platforms with Joe Pine, kind of the pioneer in experience economy. And he and I have built a database. I've also joined a startup part-time around NFTs, which is super interesting. We just finished a white paper that hasn't been released yet, but that will be out soon. And then, as I mentioned, partnering with Shaun on this Adapt Lab initiative.
Thank you, Peter. Let me hand it over to Shaun to talk about herself and Adapt Lab and Throughline.
Great, thank you. So Throughline is an enterprise design and strategy firm, very focused on visual communications, taking teams through different experiences, particularly around innovation, creating positive change, and of course, solving all kinds of problems. Just a little background, I'm a retired partner from Deloitte as well as from KPMG. And I spent a lot of time there working in strategy and innovation. And my passion is really around women in the workplace. And I've served on numerous boards and speak on the topic quite often.
Great.
Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Shaun. All right, now let's jump into the real material everyone wants to hear about. Marketplaces and the platform economy and the organizational design and considerations for building your own marketplace and operating at platform scale. So let's take a look at today. Who runs a marketplace? So out of the 10 biggest global retailers, all 10 out of 10 of the biggest retailers, a lot of these are in China and the US. Some are traditional retailers, some are just purely online marketplaces, but 10 out of the 10 biggest retailers globally operate marketplaces. That's data from the UN. In the US, 9 out of the 10 biggest retailers operate marketplaces. That's data from eMarketer. But it's not just the big giants, it's also startups that have been growing extremely fast. These unicorns, or companies defined as generating over $1 billion of revenue or market cap, that are still private. 8 out of 10 of the e-commerce marketplaces, 8 out of 10 of the top e-commerce unicorns and supply chain unicorns operate marketplaces as well. So it's not just the big companies, it's the small, fast startups. Most of those companies that have grown to multi-billion-dollar valuations have done so in less than a decade using the platform business model. So again, to summarize, 10 out of 10 of the global retailers, 9 out of 10 of the global US retailers, and 8 out of 10 of the top US e-commerce unicorns all operate marketplaces. But it's not just the big guys. This is limited just to the retail marketplaces, and Peter will talk more about B2B marketplaces. But a lot of these companies are doing a lot of GMV, or gross merchandise value, essentially how you account for top line revenue. Companies doing over $1 billion, over $500 million, $250 million, $100 billion. There are over 100 marketplaces doing over $100 million of gross merchandise value. So there are a lot of players in the space operating marketplaces, and many more. And that, again, it was just the retail sector. We'll talk more about B2B in a little bit. But let's also take a step back in history and look at one of the important factors of marketplaces and how, which is a labor shift and the organizational change that happened over 100 years ago and what's happening nowadays. So over 100 years ago, essentially customers would go up to a counter and the retail employee would go to the stock room or the shelves behind them and pick goods off the shelves. So all that labor was performed by the retail employee. Piggly Wiggly really revolutionized retail just a little over 100 years ago in 1918 with the first self-service store where the customers would walk through the store, pick up items off the shelves, and check out at the end. So with this shifting of labor, Piggly Wiggly was able to dominate the grocery market and grow from 1 store to 2,600 stores in just 15 years. Know anybody else that's grown at that scale? Well, Amazon has certainly grown by shifting labor costs from the retailer to the suppliers, not to the customers, but they shift a lot of that labor to the third-party sellers. And that's one of the organizational changes that we'll talk about in an e-commerce pipeline. So if you've attended the MIT platform strategy or read the book Platform Revolution, you'll hear a lot about pipeline business and compared to a platform business. So I'll dig into the difference here in a pipeline versus a platform. So traditional e-commerce and pretty much retail as well, you have buyers that will source goods from distributors or manufacturers as the first step in this linear transaction pipeline. Then they have to negotiate those contracts. Sometimes those contract negotiations and these first steps can take weeks or months. Typically that's data is loaded into the enterprise resource platform, and the items are then merchandised, perhaps with photography, with descriptive text that'll be beneficial for SEO purposes. There may be a team of merchandisers working on that. The retailer or e-commerce operator will also have to set the price, hold the inventory, both physically, meaning they have to have distribution centers or fulfillment locations to physically hold the goods, as well as financially. So money will have to be spent to or allocated to the distributors or manufacturers to purchase the goods. Orders will be processed. Typically, this is automated, of course. And the fulfillment is a last step in this, again, really more the transaction pipeline of retail or e-commerce going out to customers. So again, very linear pipeline business. But now let's look at a platform business like a marketplace. So you have a much smaller team of people. At the bottom, you see one person to recruit sellers, one person to support sellers, and a third icon there for process orders. Again, that's typically automated, much like in e-commerce. So really the two main transactional people are seller recruiters and seller support people. There's a standard term and condition, or the nexus of rules on which a platform operates for a network of sellers and buyers to transact on top of this platform. So the standard terms and conditions are the same for all sellers. That's very important. As I mentioned, sometimes in that linear pipeline model, we've seen some of our B2B clients take 2 months to onboard new products from new sellers, which is obviously not very nimble in today's economy. In the network ecosystem of a platform business model, of course, you have the customers at the end, but it's truly a scalable network ecosystem where you have many different sellers, which they manage their own pipeline process. They source goods, they merchandise the goods, they set the prices, they fulfill the goods. All of those linear activities are now outsourced to the third-party seller who will source goods from a distributor. And you can have, of course, you'll have many sellers. They can buy from one or multiple distributors. In fact, even multiple resellers can be buying from the same distributor. So that brings in price competitiveness. So sellers might be bidding against each other to sell that good to the customers in the network, which drives down prices for the customers. Of course, those distributors may opt to start selling on the marketplace themselves as well, removing the middleman of this third-party seller. And in fact, many brands, CPG companies, well-known apparel or other types of goods are sold directly from the manufacturer on marketplaces to customers, skipping the distributor and the reseller. So looking at these two models, we really outsource a lot of that labor of finding goods, loading them in the catalog, merchandising them, setting the price, holding inventory, doing fulfillment. All of that is handled by the third-party seller. So let's take a step back and compare these two models. So if you're hiring a team to scale a business, would you rather hire these 8 people? Again, this is more focused on the transactional line, or 2 people, somebody to recruit sellers, somebody to support sellers. And again, processing orders is more of an automated process, but a step in the process. So obviously there are new roles and new organizational structures as you transform to have a third-party marketplace. Of course, it's possible to have a hybrid of first party and third party, but some of the benefits is really the scalability. And we've seen a lot of retailers shift to just trying out a marketplace, to operating the marketplace as their core business, to shifting more and more of their products, their transactions from first party goods that they stock to third party seller goods. And the reason why is that pipeline businesses scale linearly, meaning if you want to double your SKU count, you need to double your head count. You need twice as many merchandisers to merchandise twice as many products. And same with revenue. Your revenue is you need to double your head count to double your revenue. Whereas in a marketplace, this is more of a exponential graph. So a small team can really scale exponentially as those third-party sellers are doing a lot of the work in the network. In the platform economy mindset, this is called an inverted firm, where you'll see, if you compare, for example, Airbnb, the number of employees at Airbnb versus the number of employees at a Marriott, one's first party, one's third party goods or services that are being resold. Huge difference in how many people you need internally to scale the marketplace. So let's look at the size of an organization that you'll need to operate your marketplace. Again, this is more in the transactional pipeline. Peter will talk more about the strategy and the platform professionals. So to start off with, in year 1 of a small marketplace with 10 to 100 sellers, maybe doing with 1,000 to 10,000 SKUs, doing less than $10 million of gross merchandise value, you can get by with 4 people. You don't really see the benefits of the network effects of the marketplace here, but 1 person providing seller support, 2 people to recruit sellers into your network, and 1 marketplace manager who's doing a little bit of strategy, but also managing this process. Year 2, if you scale to 100 to 500 sellers, up to 100,000 SKUs. And we've had many of our clients scale to 100,000 or 1 million SKUs within 1 to 2 years of operating and launching a marketplace. You may get up to 50 million in gross merchandise value in this range. So you need to add more seller recruiters, more seller support, perhaps some customer support for interfacing with the sellers, the third-party sellers as an interface. This is not the general customer support for your business. As you get into bigger year 3 of a large, with 2,000 sellers, 1 million SKUs, doing $250 million of GMV, you'll see corresponding increases in headcounts. And then as you get into more of an extra large or $250 million or more GMV in your marketplace, you see corresponding increases in headcounts. You may have some additional roles in there, more of a director instead of a manager for the marketplace, additional seller support managers to manage all the seller support individuals. Some more seller marketing gets added in here as you want to bring on more sellers. So again, this is the transactional team for a marketplace. There's also the platform professionals, which I'll hand it over to Peter to talk about as his expertise.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. And again, thank you and your team for inviting us to speak today. I loved your history there on Piggly Wiggly. I knew that there was a transition, but I hadn't realized that they were able to scale so fast with that particular business model. Really interesting history. Thank you for sharing that. So what I'd like to do is share some insights from study that we've been doing on platform talent. But this, I guess, reinforces what Tom was saying with respect to the e-commerce sites. When you look more broadly at platforms in general, and this is the market capitalization of the largest 100, you can see that in 2016, they captured or produced about $4.3 trillion in market capitalization, and that has since grown. This is the latest figures from 2021, over $14 trillion now. So platforms have become an integral part of the global economy. They're no longer these kind of novel, interesting little startups. They're central to how trade and commerce are happening on a global basis. And as you can see from the map, where the platforms reside varies. The United States has really embraced this platform business model and is responsible for new unicorns, it seems, almost every month. There's new ones popping up. I just saw that OpenSea, which is an NFT marketplace, has just hit $1.5 billion market capitalization. Asia obviously has been a big source. One kind of curious thing is why Europe has been lagging. It's not that there aren't platforms in Europe, it's just that Europe has had a more challenging time in actually launching its own indigenous platforms that reach these large scales. But I think there's a lot of attention. I actually am in France right now, speaking to an executive team. So the European companies have woken up to this phenomenon and are looking now to change their strategy. Okay, next slide. So as you can see here, this is data from January, and it's just a small sample of the hot platform positions that are now available worldwide. You can see San Francisco is obviously a hotbed because there's so many platforms there, and I just highlight one from Google. Also in Latin America, you can see there's another Google position open, but Peloton has been hiring a lot. And then you move to Europe, you've got companies like Activation Blizzard, which is a gaming platform. Miracle is a company that's working to help other companies build platforms. So I put them in this category of platform employment. Zalando is a big e-commerce marketplace in Germany. Bookings is a travel. And then you move to Asia. TikTok has been hiring quite a bit. Uber expanding into Taiwan. So they've been hiring there. And then Rakuten in Japan. And then obviously New Zealand, Australia are interesting markets as well. And then you have South Africa with Naspers, very large platform company that has lots of subsidiaries. And so they also are out there looking. So if you go to the next slide. So who's out there when you look at people hiring platform professionals? One are replenishers. These are existing platforms that are looking to fill their ranks with people who have left. Every company has attrition, so they need to backfill that. So I call those the replenishers. Then you have the builders. These are new emerging platforms that have reached that inflection point and are rapidly growing their teams to meet the demand. And then you have incumbent companies that are recognizing that platform strategies can be quite advantageous, if not necessary, as we move into this platform economy. And so they're out there looking as well. So you have these three different groups all looking for similar talent profiles. So if you go to the next slide. So this is really leading to what I would say is the rise of a professional class of people who build really interesting and exciting careers offering these capabilities. You know, they have a deep domain knowledge of how platforms operate, and they're in demand. And so there are really interesting and exciting opportunities to move into this area, build that expertise, and move up through your career and in companies with this skill set. So let's look into what that skill set constitutes. So what I'm talking about here are not the freelancers and gig workers. They get a lot of attention, and rightly so. They're part of that inverted firm. Companies like Airbnb and Uber have really put the spotlight on the freelancer gig worker economy, which has become kind of in places like the United States, quite sizable portion of the working population. But what I'm speaking about here are the managers, the professional class that actually operates the platform. And they can be technical, they can be the line manager, the product managers, and then they can be also involved in operations. And then of course you have the executive team as well. And so when I speak of platform professionals, I'm really speaking of this team that's responsible for the management of the platform. Okay, so next slide. So if we look broadly at what constitutes this population, if you take that 100 platform firms that I mentioned earlier that now produce about $14.5 trillion of market capitalization, and you look at their direct employment, it's 4.2 million people now working for platform companies. Now, not all of those are managers. So if a standard kind of representation of the management of firms is about 10% of a company's employee base will be managers. And so that takes you down to 420,000 platform professionals out there operating platforms. And if you take a third of those as being strategically important and really need to understand platform logic, then I think you take that number down to about 138,000. And then if you want to estimate, the churn rate, how many people are leaving positions, the standard number again is 10%. So that takes it down to about 13,800. But that means that if we triple that number from the 100 I mentioned to broadly the platform economy, you're looking at about 40,000 roles a year now that are available to people interested in moving into this space. And also on the company side, that's 45,000 positions that they need to fill each year for people with this specialized capability. Okay, next slide. So what are these roles? We did a large study looking at 11,000 job postings over the course of a year. And from that, we're able to discern really 6 key roles. One is around platform strategy. And you see these jobs pop up quite frequently. Almost every week, there's an interesting platform strategy role, either in a bank or at an e-commerce company or an incumbent that's looking to grow their platform position. And so those jobs are available. But an even more popular job is platform product manager. This is the person responsible for a platform. And in some companies, you'll have more than one platform operating. So I call those multi-platform platforms. And so you'll need product managers for each one of those platforms or pieces of the platform. And then because you're creating value outside the firm, it's quite common for companies to hire platform ecosystem managers, or sometimes it's called platform community managers. These are the folks that interface with those third parties in the communities that are essential to your overall ecosystem. And then there's engineering roles, of course. And if you move into these thousands and tens of thousands and even millions of SKUs, you need a good engineering team that understands not how to just manage SKUs, but understands that in the context of a platform strategy. So these are talent roles around engineering, but with a need for understanding how that operates in the context of making a platform work. And then you have data management, which is key. And here it's not just data scientists, but people who understand the architecture of the data, both in how you're acquiring it, how it's structured internally and stored, and who has access to that data, and then how it may be or may not be shared with third parties. And then finally, we have privacy compliance and trust. And this is becoming more important as the regulatory regimes around platforms catch up, and there are more and more rules and regulations around how data is managed and other aspects of the platform. And so we're seeing more of these platform compliance roles pop up. Okay, next. So kind of a great example of how this is playing out in a traditional product company is Nike. Nike made a decision in 2017 to go more direct to consumer rather than selling through actually the big e-commerce partners, and made actually a lot of attention when they announced that they would no longer sell directly through Amazon. And so they're now selling on their own. And so that's a kind of an interesting phenomenon. So some companies are big enough and have a strong enough brand, they can actually go and move off of the big e-commerce platforms. Another move was to hire John Donahoe. He's a veteran platform CEO. He spent years at eBay and has a deep knowledge of how platforms operate. And then with COVID, Nike was faced with the impact on its retail stores. And so one of the moves it made was to make its fitness app free. And it was charging previously and made it free. In 2020, more than 15 million people worldwide downloaded that app. So suddenly they just grew their apps for their fitness quite substantially. And that app acts as another channel, i.e. customer acquisition, because they, through their fitness activities, also get exposure to Nike products. So there's a very interesting interplay between these experiences that Nike is offering and its primary goal, which is to sell apparel and obviously shoes. Okay, next. So just to give you a sense of how serious Nike is in terms of the roles and how it has a platform lens, these are the job titles that were very recently offered by Nike. This is, you can see when these were posted, and I'm sure most of, if not all of these have been filled, but you can see here that they were looking for a senior director for enterprise platform, right? So, and then the next one, senior director, enterprise architecture and platforms for Greater China. So they're thinking systematically about how this platform operates. And then they have senior director, foundational platform services. So they obviously have a service unit within the company, given its size and scale, and servicing these very large programs, that they have some sort of center of excellence that is helping to support that. So you can see they have a very strong focus on platform talent and are out there in the marketplace looking for people with deep expertise on how platforms operate. Okay, next slide. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Shaun. I'm very excited about this idea of applying platform professionals and platform thinking to how you actually execute this and help support leaders that are moving into these types of roles. So Shaun?
Great, thank you, Peter. Let's move to the next slide. So I want to summarize here. So why do a focus lab? One of the things that we've noticed is that so many leaders have so many things to do when they take on these roles. And how do they prioritize and make sure that they jumpstart their careers, their positions that they're entering, and also even leaders that have been in their roles for a while that really need to refocus and confirm their strategic priorities. And so that's one reason that we did a focus lab. there's a lot of roadblocks and clutter in teams and in your day-to-day activities in these roles. And so this lab really helps leaders really focus. It's an 8-hour, one-day lab. We also in the lab evaluate your team, your resources, your budget, to make sure that they're matched to your priorities that we set out in the beginning that are your strategic priorities. And then we also talk about the communications around your plan. Who do you have to communicate to? Who do you maybe need to obtain budget from, that you need to explain what you're doing and why? Because Throughline is so great at taking your strategy and visualizing it. They've shown considerable success in taking a strategy and bringing it to a visual component in order for you to get resources, both dollars and talent. Next slide. So what does a lab look like? This is sort of the steps that we go through in the lab. We have a North Star exercise, sort of what is the vision? What do you want to achieve? How do we get there? We prioritize actions and align to strategy. And we're going to have just a little slide after this to really talk about how this section of the lab is really, we've tailored it, Peter and I, to platform roles. So he laid out, the various roles of privacy compliance, strategy, data management, product management. Our lab is designed for each one of those different roles, and their teams, actually. If you want to bring a team through the lab, we can do that as well. We examine your resources, as I discussed, look at communications, and then we look at your stakeholder groups and how to target particular stakeholder groups based on where your priorities lie. And assess your relationships with those folks. And all this while we're developing an action plan as the lab goes on, ending in an actual 180-day plan that when you walk out of the lab, you have focus. Next slide. The great thing about our lab is that it was designed to be virtual. We can do it in person, but we knew that a lot of folks, were still working remotely. They needed a way to bring their teams together, and they also needed a way to have their individuals go through this lab. So our labs are very interactive, they're very visual, and we use a whiteboarding tool, several of them, depending upon the client's needs. But these are just some examples of some of the tools that we use when we go through our lab. Next slide. What I have here is just when I told you that the lab is focused on platform professionals, we really have taken Peter's research of these 11,000 different, I think he curated 11,000 different job descriptions. And we have created a lab just for each of those roles, and giving you some examples here of some of the jobs to be done related to those different roles. So for instance, in visionary, these are types of tasks you would do that are visionary, developing a strategy for a balanced ecosystem. I mean, these are very specific to each of the roles and what your responsibilities are. And so we've designed them using, as I said, his research. Peter, did I get that right? It was 11,000 curated roles that you've looked at?
Yeah, correct. And in fact, these post-its come directly from job postings. So we didn't just think about, oh, what would that role be? These come directly from job descriptions that companies have written, and we've synthesized those, kind of lay out a framing device for thinking about what kind of roles and responsibilities that companies are actually looking for.
Next slide. So this is just an example of the kind of plan that we put together as we're going through the lab. Like I said, you walk out with a general roadmap. And one of the great things, again, Throughline does is help you visualize this roadmap in a more appealing manner. It's one of the other outputs of the communication module that we have in here. So that's just a quick snapshot of the leadership lab that we've developed for these roles, because we understand that people need some jump start of their strategy when they take on this stuff. And
yeah, and I would just mention that this can be applied for all three categories I mentioned. The replenishers, those are existing platforms that are looking to hire new people. They've hired them, and those people need to have an action plan to be successful in their role. for companies that are starting out and really building, and they also hire people that need to scale, and they need to get organized to be able to do that. And then finally, the incumbent companies that are trying to launch platforms, and they may have people in-house that they've trained up and are looking to lead this initiative, or they may have brought somebody in from the outside, right? So I think this can be applied for all three of those categories.
Tom, I'll turn it over to you. It looks like we have a bunch of good questions coming in.
Yeah, Tom Gatos, our Chief Marketing Officer at McFadyen Digital, has been curating some of the questions. So Tom, do you want to share some of those with us, please?
Absolutely, and thank you everybody for the contributions. We have a lot here. If we don't get to it, we will actually reply via email and address it to you personally for follow-up. So please do keep them rolling in. The first one we're going to start with here comes from an e-commerce retailer existing. So we're an existing e-commerce retailer considering our own marketplace as a 2022 initiative. What roles should be added to augment that traditional structure to get started? And how do we know if those roles can be combined with the existing operation or if they should be net new to the marketplace?
Very good question. Peter, do you want to take a first stab at that?
Yeah, I think, Tom laid out a roadmap of sort of the key players from a very focused perspective of like, onboarding the buyers, and then somebody needs to take responsibility for that, right? So that would, in my categorization, those would be the ecosystem, like who's responsible for managing those third parties. And there's actually quite a bit that goes into those roles. They need to set the policy for who's onboarded. They need to be process focused, right? What is the process? And as Tom mentioned, some companies had a 2-month window. That's probably not really what you want. You want a much faster onboarding process than that. So getting folks that understand that and then can draw on best practices out there, right?
So, Peter, have you seen anybody repurposing current roles? I mean, I don't know, your study has done any of that work yet, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, in fact, there was a great example. I saw it in actually one of McFadyen's earlier webinars. There was a retailer in Canada that recognized that launching experiences was a way to attract new customers and expand their share of wallet of existing customers. And the woman, who was incredibly articulate in presenting, as she came from that organization and was tapped to launch that.
You mentioned 2 points there, Peter. Let me add on to one was you mentioned the 2-month time frame. We've actually seen that in pipeline businesses, those 7 or 8 roles that have to happen linearly to bring something on, including vendor contract negotiations and ERP loads and so forth, often do take 2 months for especially B2B distributors. And as trends change, you need to be more nimble. Companies need to be more nimble in adapting to what the customer wants. Marketplaces can typically onboard new sellers and new products with their standard terms and conditions and standard interfaces within a week typically. Sometimes it can be as fast as a couple of days, sometimes 2 weeks on a longer time frame, but you can be much more nimble. You also have a lot more resiliency with that as well. A great example of the pandemic was when you couldn't go down to your local retailer or your general retailers online e-commerce site to buy masks. Where did a lot of people turn to? Etsy, where you had thousands or tens of thousands of people making masks and shipping them independently, as opposed to that legacy slow pipeline of limited source availability of a pipeline business versus a network effect of a platform business model.
Yep.
So you get much more nimbleness, you get much more resiliency. And I like a phrase that Peter used earlier. Those people in the company that have that pipeline jobs, they don't lose their jobs, they lose their roles. They get retrained or reallocated into other positions within the organization. A great quote by Peter about that. You don't lose your job, you lose your role. And an example 100 years ago of Piggly Wiggly, did that hurt retail jobs for Piggly Wiggly employees? No, they grew from 1 store to 2,600 stores in 15 years. that's a lot of jobs that they created with their new transformation of the new organizational model for retail. Great.
Great answers.
Next question, Tom.
Yeah, the next one I think flows right into this, right? This was just kind of happenstance. This was actually the first question that was asked. And Peter, you were referencing Rachel Goldman, the thoughtful marketplace.
Rachel, that's her name. Yeah.
Yeah, and she had a great talk track when we launched the Marketplace Best Practices book, actually, about the difference between starting a net new organization versus grafting a marketplace and building it on top of an existing organization. And that's what this question is. It's pretty simple. How should a business decide whether to add a marketplace onto an existing e-commerce organization or turn it up as a completely new operation within the organization?
That's where you need to hire the platform strategist, right? That was one of the roles. And some companies have tapped consultancies, and there are consultancies out there that do that type of analysis. But it's also an internal discussion of what are your capabilities, how much of them can be repurposed, and it's what is the infrastructure you need to build that can be repurposed or added anew, and then what does the talent situation look like in the company? Do you have the bench? Does it require just a little bit of workshopping to get them up to speed, or are you talking serious training that could take much longer? And so I think each company has to do that type of assessment and analysis to make that call. So it require understanding kind of what the bench looks like today. And then also, there's also the question of what's the competition look like. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of companies out there looking for platform talent right now. So there's always this balance of, is it cheaper and better to train our internal employees or to go out into the marketplace where you may face pretty high costs, right?
And some of the roles are that would get retooled or reskilled might be also some of the ones that are most resistant to a marketplace. One of the things that we see especially in retailers that may have bigger retailers that may have dozens of merchandisers, and the head of merchandising says, no, we can't have a third-party marketplace because we need to control all that. There's worry about cannibalization or worry about lower quality of goods or lower quality experiences for the customers on the site. While those merchandisers and the managers of them can transition into seller recruiters, seller managers, in fact, even doing some catalog curation as a part of that, even though they may have some resistance up front because that's their job.
Right. Well, there's that issue, and then where are they? Are they an incumbent that already has millions of customers? They want scale immediately, and so in that case, it may make sense to hire somebody from a platform company that already has that experience. Versus if you're a startup and you're kind of gradually growing that market, you can probably build that talent base, as they learn, as you grow. So I think really depends if you're an incumbent or startup or replenisher.
Very good point.
Great. And then the next question, I think, again, flows pretty naturally here. It's Peter, it's addressed to you. You referenced a familiarity with the platform model as a major advantage when these companies are staffing these marketplace roles, right? Naturally. Is there currently a shortage of these roles? And if so, how can you be competitive when hiring against other marketplaces?
Yes, great question. What we're seeing is that, for example, let's take Zalando in Germany. If you look at the existing executive team, many of those came from either management consulting jobs or other platforms, right? Now, the challenge is not every company can do that. And so I think that we're going to have to find, for example, where can they recruit from and identify the universities that actually have platform offerings as part of their curriculum. And there are a growing number of those universities around the world and MBA programs. So understanding where to find that. There's also a growing number of networks that are being established that help you understand kind of the community of people that are truly interested in platforms. And the other way to identify talent that is interesting is that there are a number of courses that are offered through executive education programs that offer certifications in this space. And so looking out for those folks. And then I would recommend helping the recruiters to know better what to look for. Often recruiters don't know the details of what makes a good platform person from a technical standpoint or a leadership standpoint. So working with them to make sure that they're writing the job descriptions in the right way and understand what kind of filters to put, and not look just for the easy to identify things like, do they know Python, to some of these platform logic, like do they understand network effects, and things of that nature. So I think helping the recruiters recruit better is an important strategy.
I see a question that came in from Diego. This may be a great one for Peter, because I know this came up during your the MIT Platform Strategy Summit that you co-led last week. A great event. I recommend that for anybody who hasn't attended. But Diego's question is how to sell the idea of a platform to a centuries-old and very traditional infrastructure industry. I know a lot of the discussion was about energy companies and utilities and electric, so forth.
Well, that's a space that I've gotten interested in. I actually come from an energy infrastructure background, so been looking. There have been a couple of efforts by those companies to launch platforms. 10 years ago, for example, GE launched Watt Station, which was an EV charging that didn't work out very well. Johnson Controls launched a platform that didn't work out very well. But you live and learn, and now we're seeing more traction with platform business models in the infrastructure space. Shell has recently launched a platform in the mining sector, which is pretty interesting. Siemens has a platform strategy. Schneider Electric has its platform strategy. ABB has a platform strategy. So you're going to run down the list now. So I think it's more, if you don't have a platform strategy, you're the odd man out. And then I think there's growing evidence that platforms perform better across a variety of metrics, and be happy to share some of that research if you need help making the case.
Well, I think, Tom, one of the things that you brought up about scaling, shifting costs and how the cost structure changes when you move to a platform company would be really a great, that part of the support of selling a platform company is really to do that look at your industry and see what costs would be eliminated. How could you shift all that if you took on a business, platform business model?
Yeah, the other one that I would mention is that platforms can be powerful innovation engines. It's not just about cutting costs and shifting a cost, but because you tap into an ecosystem that is often has its own resources to innovate, and you're connected to them, you can benefit from that innovation. So you scale your innovation. You also open your organization up to new ideas and innovations. And look at Salesforce with Salesforce One. They're constantly looking to their customers for new ideas that then they bring on to their platform and resell. But they have a share. It's not just them taking that and then reselling it. They actually do a revenue split. So that's another thing about platform strategy, is really understanding how to have an equitable share of the ecosystem so that you're incentivizing third parties to co-create with you.
Two of our experiences have been with big century-old companies. One's the world's largest alcoholic beverage distributor, and the other is the third largest US food distributor. And what they did, those two organizations, they spun up a innovation hub in a separate location, separate team. And with those teams, we built marketplaces. The traditional legacy business stayed on, and sometimes in a kind of remote, more industrial town. And the innovation hub, often located in a separate city that's more innovative, was driving a lot of the platform business transformation.
Great.
Right. So we are at 50 minutes here. If we have one more question, or should we wrap up now? Tom, how are we doing?
I was going to say wrap up. Another one came in that's pretty good, and I think this was directed mostly to Shaun. And this was given the planning that you had shown as part of that session when you're doing your organizational design planning, and in relation specifically to the growth of the seller ecosystem. Is there a reliable way to forecast when a new headcount will be needed in relation to the growth of the seller ecosystem?
I'm not sure I have those details. I mean, I haven't done those forecasting. What we would do in the lab primarily is talk through that and understand what needs to be done in order to figure that out. We could also bring in subject matter experts, and Peter and I have been talking about that as to how we prep for these labs. I will tell you one of the things, we interview folks and we do research. So whatever concerns or ideas that the person going through the lab has, like something like that, we would go out ahead of time and do some research or bring in a subject matter expert to help work through that. But I don't have that information handy. Peter, you don't either, I would assume, for that.
I would say in general, it's going to depend on the industry. So B2B typically has larger transaction volumes and lower per unit, or per lower transaction counts, but higher dollar per transaction values. Some elements like fashion retail might have a higher turnover and faster changing inventory, as opposed to more of a commodity industry. So it really depends on the industry. But there are generally some benchmarks out there for some of the bigger, well-known industries that have some metrics available, depending on the industry.
And we would bring those into the lab.
Yep.
Great. Well, all right, that brings us to 52 minutes. So we'll give people 5 minutes to take a break before your next meeting and your next Zoom call. But I definitely want to thank our esteemed panelist, Peter Evans. It's an honor having you on our webinar here, and same Shaun as well. You bring a lot of great innovative ideas from your experience running these labs and helping organizations figure out their future. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Peter and Shaun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom, for having us. Thank you, Shaun.
And thanks everybody for attending. Have a great rest of your day.